Good evening. So I hope everybody is well. Here, things are getting back to normal, finally. I don't know how it is in Poland yet, but the restaurants are open, movie theaters are open with social distancing. Sporting events are open with full capacity. So we are returning to normal. So I hope the same will be true in Poland soon. So whatever normal means now, I don't think we're not done with masks yet. That's for sure. So, all right. So here is what we are going to talk about today: the origins of conversion to Judaism. Where it came from, where it comes from, why it happened. And then next week, we're going to talk about all the modern dilemmas of conversion. Who recognizes whose conversion? The problems in Israel over who is a Jew in conversion, which have gone numerous times before the Supreme Court of Israel and go to the heart of who is a Jew. So that's what we're going to be talking about for the next two sessions. So first, let's start. We're going to go in this class from the biblical times through the ancient times of the Talmud and a little into the Middle Ages. That's the historical period we're going to cover. So let me start out with the following. In the Bible, there really isn't something that we would call conversion to another religion. As I mentioned last time, when the woman married into the family, she assumed the national and religious identity of the man. There was no ritual of conversion. In the earlier biblical period, what we call Judaism was a national tribal religion, meaning that the Israelites did not expect other people to worship their God. They were free to worship their own gods. So in the Ten Commandments, understanding it historically, when it says, "You shall have no other gods before me," that's just for the Israelites. Other people can worship other deities. It's not incumbent upon them in the early biblical period to worship the God of Israel. But what happens in the late biblical period, in the Second Temple period, and before that a little, when the Israelites, and let's call them now Jews, are in Babylonian exile, and when they return under the Persians, they start thinking about their God, not just as a national tribal God, but the God of the whole world, the God that all people should worship. So that Judaism becomes a universal religion and not a tribal religion. And if that didn't happen, Judaism as we know it today wouldn't exist. And not only that, plain and simple, Christianity and Islam wouldn't exist either. You know, we would have just been some tribe that had a God that people discovered references to, you know, like the Canaanites. But this not only transformed Judaism, you can make the argument that it transformed world history. But that doesn't mean there was a formal mechanism to converting to Judaism in biblical times. All right. So that's it's much more complicated than that, but I've just tried to simplify the history. Any questions before we start looking at the text? Okay. So, Dominica, could you please show the sheet labeled the Biblical and Second Temple text? Okay.
Can you see it?
That's it. You got it. So this is a famous passage from Isaiah that was written just at the time when the Jews have returned to Persia, returned from Persia, from Babylonian exile to the land of Israel, and are rebuilding Jerusalem. And the beginning of this passage, I didn't bring the whole passage, talks about how foreigners shouldn't say that God has excluded them. Foreigners who have, the phrase in the Bible is who have bound themselves to God. And then it goes on to say, as for, and by the way, this passage also contains a very famous phrase which enters into Judaism. It talks about people who don't have children, who still adhere to the God of Israel, that they shouldn't worry about not having children, but God will make for them, the Hebrew is Yad Vashem, a name and a monument and a name, because God will remember them. And this is, of course, where the name for the most important Holocaust Memorial and Museum in Jerusalem comes from, this biblical verse. Now let's go to the section I quoted. As for the foreigners who attach themselves to God, to minister to him, and to love the name of the Lord, to be his servants, all who keep Shabbat and do not profane it, and who hold fast to my covenant, I will bring them to my sacred mountain, meaning the mountain where the temple is. Let them rejoice in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and sacrifice shall be welcome my altar, for my house shall be called a house of prayer for all people. There were people who started believing in the God of Israel, non-Jews, non-Israelites, and they worship God, and they want to worship God in the temple in Jerusalem, and they are allowed to. They're allowed to bring animal sacrifices, which was a chief form of worship in those days. And the religion and the house of God is open to all people. So this is Judaism as a universal religion. It's not, these people, there's no formal mechanism of conversion. There's no ritual of conversion. I would call it a harbinger, an allusion to the future of conversion, but there's not conversion per se. Now we know that even earlier, there were foreigners who lived with the Israelites and who were allied with them. For example, at the court of Saul and David, Saul has a chief shepherd who's mentioned in the Bible, who turns out to be a bad guy, somebody named Doeg the Edomite. Edom is a neighboring people on the Red Sea. Or in the famous story of David and Bathsheba, Bathsheba's husband, who David arranges to have killed in battle, is called Uriah the Hittite. He's a foreigner. So foreigners, even before this period, lived among the Israelites. Whether they worship the God of Israel, we don't know. One other passage I want to mention is in the book of Esther, which of course takes place in Persia. In the end of the book of Esther, in chapter 9, verse 27, it talks about how Jews undertake the obligation to observe the holiday of Purim. And not only that, there are Gentiles who attach themselves to the Jews, who the Hebrew word is mityahadim. Now, some people thought this meant that they converted to Judaism, but I don't think that's the case. It means they pretend to be Jews. Why? Because the Jews are victorious. They want to be on the winning side. They also take upon themselves the obligation to observe Purim. So there are people that attach themselves to the Jews in the book of Esther, maybe for the wrong reason, just because they want to be on the winning side. Let's go down, if you could move the screen down to the passages from the book of Ruth. Whoops, too far. Okay, perfect. Okay, wait, perfect. All right. So in Ruth, Ruth is a Moabite. We talked a little about the story of Ruth last time. So there's a group of Israelites who escape a famine, go to the land of Moab, a neighboring kingdom on the other side of the Jordan River. The sons of the parents, Elimelech and Naomi, marry Moabite women. The sons die, the father Elimelech dies, and Naomi decides to go back to her native city of Bethlehem. One of the daughter-in-laws is named Orpah. She decides to go back to her Moabite family, but Ruth decides to go back with Naomi to the land of Israel. And in a very famous passage, when Naomi says to her, look, why are you going with me back to Israel? Why don't you just stay here with your family in your native land? Ruth says to her, do not urge me to leave you, to turn back and not to follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. So she adopts the people and religion of her mother-in-law. Now, for the rabbis writing centuries later, who, when conversion is already well established, Ruth is the ideal of the convert. She's the perfect convert, the perfect loyal Jew. But just to repeat what I said before, that's a reading back into history of the present times of the rabbis. There is no conversion in any formal sense to Judaism in this period. And in fact, throughout the story, she is still known as Ruth the Moabite. That seems to suggest she's still a foreigner, at least in the eyes of the author, but she becomes the model later on in the rabbinic period for the ideal convert. What does seem to be the case, though, is that in those rare cases where men join the community of Israel, there is one thing required of them, and that is circumcision. Although the Israelites were not the only ancient people that circumcised. We know this from other peoples. For example, the Ishmaelites, later known as the Arabs, also practiced circumcision. So, so much for the biblical period. All right, let's take away the text for a minute so I can see people's faces. All right, does anybody have any questions? I just did about 1,000 years of history. All right, we all good? Okay, so let's move on to the Second Temple period, and please put the text back up, text number 3 from the Bible and Second Temple period. All right, thank you. So this is from the second book of Maccabees, which did not make it, interestingly, into the Hebrew Bible. It's part of the Catholic Bible, not part of the Protestant Bible. We don't have to go into the reasons for that. But the second book, the second book of Maccabees was written around the year 100 BCE. And it tells part of the story behind Hanukkah. So if you recall the story, there is a Syrian Greek king named Antiochus, who, along with some Jews, wants to forcibly convert or assimilate the Jews living in his territory under his control to Greek ways. So he forbids circumcision. He and his Jewish allies take the Holy Temple into Jerusalem and make it into a temple to worship Zeus. A group of Jews revolt against this. They're from a family of Kohanim, of priests, called the Hashmonaim or Hasmoneans. We also know them as the Maccabees, after the name of one of their military leaders, Yehuda HaMaccabee, Judah the Hammer, because he was such a fierce warrior. So I'm going to summarize this and not read all of this. There's a story in the second book of Maccabees in which God punishes the Syrian Greek king, Antiochus, with a terrible illness, and he's very, very sick. And so what does he do? He makes a promise to God if God will spare him. And here he was on his way to Jerusalem to put down the revolt and kill as many Jews as he could. And he promises to do the following. He will send sacrifices to the temple in Jerusalem and support the temple financially. And this is towards the bottom of the paragraph. In addition to all this, he would become a Jew and would visit every inhabited place in the world to proclaim the power of God. He's going to become a missionary for Judaism. Right? But when his sufferings did not go away, he writes a letter to the Jews, and I didn't give you the letter, in which he says, if I die, please support my son and be loyal to him. Now, this is a very curious incident. And for sure, it's a made-up story. Antiochus never converted to Judaism. He never wanted to convert to Judaism. It's as likely that he converted to Judaism that I'm going to suddenly play in the midfield for the Polish national team in the Euro Cup, which is coming up. Good luck to Poland. So it didn't happen. All right. Does anybody here believe that I will play a midfielder for the Polish national team? Just checking. All right, nobody. Good. So, but what's interesting here is the notion of conversion comes into play here. What does conversion consist of here? There's not a ceremony. There's not a ritual. He's going to worship the God of the Jews and pay homage to him at the temple in Jerusalem. All right. Now, let's go down to the next source. This is from the Jewish historian Josephus, and he's writing in the 1st century CE. And just a little background here. So the Hasmoneans are triumphant, right? They recapture the temple, they cleanse it from idolatry, they rededicate the temple to the service of God. That's what the Hanukkah story is all about. Hanukkah meaning dedication. And they become the rulers of a new Jewish state, and also combined the secular leadership of the state with religious leadership. Because they're priests, they become the chief priests in the temple. And so they have all the power, religious and political. And they, as we'll see, they expand their state. So this is around the year 128 BC, the events described here by Josephus, who's writing really about 200 years later. Hyrcanus, also, that he's the name of a Hasmonean king of the Jews, John Hyrcanus, also captured the Idumean cities of Adora and Marissa. The Idumeans, same things as the Edomites, a people that lived on what is today the Kingdom of Jordan along the Dead Sea. And after subduing the Idumeans, permitted them to remain in their country so long as they had themselves circumcised and were willing to observe the laws of the Judeans. And so, out of their attachment to their ancestral lands, they submitted to circumcision and to having their manner of life in all other respects being the same as that of the Judeans. And from that time on, they have continued to be Judeans. To put it simply, he conquers this people and then forces them to convert to Judaism through circumcision, through following Jewish customs and laws, and worshiping the God of Israel. It's a forced conversion. It gives them a choice. Either they can join Judaism or they can leave. He'll expel them. So this is a mass conversion. And he also does this to another people around this time called the Itureans, who are Arab people. He forcibly converts them also. Now, they don't seem to have lost their ethnic identity. What they have a political identity. They are Judeans, part of the Judean state, which, by the way, only lasts for 100 years, from about 167 BCE till 66 BCE when the Romans come in. And they belong to Judaism as a religion. Now, out of this, who comes? Herod, the famous king Herod, wicked king who slaughters left and right, kills people from his own family who he feels threatened by. He's a Roman puppet ruler, but as we all know, he's a great builder. He refurbishes the temple, makes it one of the wonders of the ancient world, builds palaces all over the case, including most famously Masada. And Herod, despite what Josephus says, who is an Edomean, who marries into the Hasmonean family, yes, he worships at the temple, but he also builds pagan temples in the land at the same time. Look, it would appear that some Edomites never let go of their pagan background. But this is basically what the Hasmoneans do to the Edomeans and Ereteans of the first kind of conversion in the history of Judaism. So what does conversion involve here? A political identity, citizenship in the Judean state, and a way of life, but not necessarily ethnicity, and not necessarily what I would call social conversion, being part of the same society, really integrated in that society. So it's a political and religious identity, and the religious identity consists of circumcision, other rituals, and worshiping God in the temple. They're not really full-fledged members of society. What prompted the Hasmoneans to do this? And where does this idea come from? Well, obviously, the idea of people worshiping God who are not Judean, who are not Israelite, is already found in the Bible. But the model for the Hasmoneans seems to have come from the Greek, in the Greek concept of Hellenization. When Alexander the Great conquered most of the ancient Near East in the 4th century BCE, he brought with him Greek civilization. And the goal of the Greeks was, the word they use is to Hellenize the native populations, to introduce them to Greek ways. Not just, it's not an ethnic identity, it's a cultural identity, to worship the Greek gods, to use Greek language, to be participants in the Greek culture. And they went out. Egypt, which has an ancient, wonderful civilization, is thoroughly Hellenized during this period, as are other portions of the Middle East. So what the Hasmoneans do is Judaize these two non-Judean people to be part of their culture and state. The Edomians don't convert because they had a religious experience or a dream in the middle of the night and suddenly believe in God. They convert for political reasons. What happens is Judaism becomes a conversionary religion in this period. If you believe that you are the one true religion, then it makes sense to share it with other people. And after the Hasmoneans, the Jews believe they should spread their religion because it is the true religion and make it open to all people, whether they be Jewish ethnically or not. And we have a lot of testimony to the fact that Jews convert a lot of people during this period, from about 100 BCE to, to the time that Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire in the 300s CE, so about a 400-year period. And one of the testimonies we have is, from of all places, the New Testament. This is from the book of Matthew. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. The Pharisees are sort of the predecessors of the people we call the rabbis. For you travel across sea and land to make one convert, and then you turn that person into twice the child of hell you are. Not a nice thing to say. It means you make them as bad as you are. But what the author of the book of Matthew is saying, and the book of Matthew is probably written around 70, 80 CE, is the Jews are busy converting people all over the place. And we have some examples of famous people who converted to Judaism during this period in the Roman Empire. I will just mention two. There's a man named Aquila or Onkelos, who's a Roman nobleman who converts to Judaism and writes the first Aramaic translation of the Bible. There is a queen from a small kingdom in Iraq named Helena of Ariabene, who converts to Judaism and becomes one of the great sponsors and very generous philanthropists to the temple in Jerusalem. In fact, her tomb, where she's buried, is in Jerusalem, and there is even a street named for her in Jerusalem. So these are just two examples of famous converts from this period. So Judaism, at least temporarily, becomes a conversionary religion during this period. Okay, let's stop here. Let's take away the text. Does anybody have any questions? Is this surprising to you? Did you know this? Just curious.
No, I didn't know this. I think it's a very fascinating story. My question would be like, when you talk about perception of Judaism by Jewish people themselves, first as a tribal religion, something local in a sense, socially local, geographically local as well, and then this change to a universal religion. I'm very curious. What are your thoughts about this? As your thoughts as a rabbi? Because this is like, in a sense, it's a religious question. It's maybe a theological question as well, in a sense, right?
It's both, and it's a sociological question. So I'll give you my personal opinion, which with the following preamble. These views represent nobody but myself. They don't represent the conservative movement. They don't represent the reform movement. These are just my own ideas. So I'm not speaking in any, not speaking in any kind of official capacity. Just me. So first of all, in America in particular, if you ask most American Jews, I think most American Jews are pretty tribal. It's the way American Jews have been brought up, particularly anybody that's a child or grandchildren of immigrants, which there's still a lot of in America. I think they have a kind of tribal view of Judaism. So if you ask not Orthodox Jews, but say conservative Jews who keep kosher, all right, why you keep kosher? They wouldn't say, oh, because God commanded me to do it. That would be a theological answer. They would say, because it makes me feel more Jewish, it makes me feel part of the Jewish people. That's tribal, right? So and this is getting ahead of the game a little, but it's a complicated question, so I'm going to give a complicated answer. We have a lot of converts to Judaism in this country now, hundreds of thousands. Most convert for reasons that they marry a Jew. Some convert for reasons of faith. But I would say, even though it's gotten much better, they're not universally welcomed in Jewish communities because of, what I would call tribalism, that you have to be born a Jew. Now, I don't agree with any of that. And personally, what having participated and taught many converts, I think they're often a great asset to the Jewish community. And in particular, demographically, given the shrinking number of non-Orthodox Jews in America, and in most of the rest of the world, frankly. The only way we're going to sustain our numbers is through conversion, through converting the non-Jewish spouses who marry Jews. I think we need to do more of that, and their children, if need be. We have to do it in a loving way. You obviously can't force people to do it, but I think it's the key to success and preservation of Judaism. Plus, I'm not in marketing, but I believe marketing is very important. I think we have a good product. I really do. And I think we just need to market it better to the world, and particularly to intermarried couples. In the Reform movement, one of the consequences of recognizing children as Jewish, when either parent is Jewish, if they're raised Jewish, which we talked about last time, is that the rate of conversion of the non-Jewish spouse in Reform congregations has gone way down because the incentive has been removed. So I think it's very important to reach out to people in interfaith marriages, and if possible, convert the non-Jewish partner, and children if they're born to a non-Jewish mother. Theologically, I do not believe you have to be a Jew to get to heaven. I believe there are many paths to heaven. I believe there are more than one valid way to worship God. But I think Judaism has a lot to offer people. So I could speak at least for another 2 hours on this subject, but I think this is enough. So you may not have enough coffee in Poland once I get going. So
thank you. I mean, I could listen a little bit more and add some more questions because it only partially addresses what my original intent was. But I understand that this is just one aspect that we want to talk to.
Right. So that's
today, so.
my personal opinion. I think we need to be encouraging conversion. And when this is next week's coming attractions. In Israel, this is really a huge problem because there are thousands of people who are not Russians, mainly, who are not Jewish according to Jewish law in Israel. And this is really a ticking time bomb that has to be addressed and is not being addressed. But that we'll talk about next week.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? All right, so now that we've established when conversion happened, why it happened, originally for political reasons, but then it became more religiously oriented. We're going to go to a rabbinic source on conversion, but I just want to say one thing about the history of conversion. In the United States in particular, Jews are taught to believe. Now, Judaism never sought to convert people. It's never been a conversionary religion. So if nothing else, I hope I've shown to you that that is not true. There was a period when it was. Jews don't want to think that Judaism was like Christianity, because Christianity, their goal was to convert the whole world. Same thing for Islam. And of course, sometimes, as we know, both religions tried to do it by force. Judaism, so American Jews, particularly liberal American Jews, don't want to hear that Judaism ever tried to have converts, because that makes them too much like Christians. But the truth is, again, there was a period when Judaism was a conversionary religion. What stopped it? The rise of Christianity, and Christianity gaining control of the Roman Empire. And there was a Roman law code in the 400s called the Theodosian Code that made it a criminal offense punishable by death for Jews to convert pagans or Christians to Judaism. To look at it somewhat lightly, that was a disincentive for Jews to go out and convert people, right? If you're going to die, if you convert people. So when Christianity became ascended, that really kind of crushed Judaism's effort to convert people. Islam had the same rules once it came to power in the 600s and 700s, that Jews were forbidden from converting people. So Judaism retreated inside and became suspicious of converts. But here and there, even under Christian and Muslim rulers, there were individuals throughout the Middle Ages that converted to Judaism, although there were few and far between, and many more Jews were lost to Christianity and Islam than Christians and Muslims who became Jews. All right, that's a very brief history. All right, let's put, Dominic, if you could please put up, please, the rabbinic sources on conversion. Thank you. Okay. So there are a number of stories about what I would call irregular or non-halachic, non-Jewish legal conversions in the Talmud, where they don't exactly follow the rules when they convert people. And here is the most famous, all right? Involves two famous Jewish leaders from the 1st century BCE, Hillel and Shammai. There was another incident involving one Gentile who came before Shammai and said to him, "Convert me on condition that you teach me the entire Torah while I'm standing on one foot." I don't know about you, but I can't stand on one foot very long. It means, you have to teach it to me in a minute. Shammai pushed him away with a builder's cubit in his hand. Shammai, his business was, he was a builder, and he happened to have it's like a ruler, a measuring device, to measure a cubit, which is about I don't know, and I only can think in inches, not in centimeters. It's about 18 inches. At any rate, he pushed him away with this builder's ruler. He thought the guy wasn't serious, so he pushed him away. So the same person comes before Hillel. Hillel immediately converts him and says to him, "This is all I'm going to teach you. That which is hateful to you, do not do to another." That is the entire Torah. The rest is its interpretation. Go and study. That's it. Being kind to other people, that's the basis of Judaism. But there are no rituals here. There's no conversion course. He converts him on the spot. So this is what I would call a non-regulated conversion. All right, let's go to the next source, please. Okay, thank you. All right, this is a lengthy source. I'm not going to read through all of it, but this is the basic conversion ceremony. It can't be dated with any precision. It's from roughly the 2nd century CE, the 100 CE. Let me just explain one, and it's the main passage is anonymous, so that's why we can't date it. A Breita is a statement that didn't make it into the Mishnah. The Mishnah is the compilation of the laws from the rabbis that was edited in the year 200 in the land of Israel. But some things didn't make it in. They were collected, and they're in a collection called the Tosefta, which just means addition. And some of them are quoted from time to time in the Talmud. So this is, if you compare it to a film, you know, when they edit a film, not everything makes it in. Some things end up being cut and they're on the floor. So it's as if somebody took the things that were cut and put on the floor of the editing room and put them and collected them and preserved them. All right, so here's the basic ritual. With regard to a potential convert who comes to a court, meaning a Jewish religious court called a Beit Din, in order to convert at the present time, the judges of the court say to him, you know, why are you converting? And here's just a great statement. Don't you know what you're getting into? Don't you know that the Jewish people at the present time are anguished, suppressed, despised, harassed, and hardships are visited upon them? This is sometime after probably both revolts against Rome. The first revolt that resulted in the destruction of the temple, and the second revolt under Bar Kokhba in 132 to 135 CE. We're really in bad shape. Why do you want to join us? The Jewish people and the Jewish religion. If he says, I know and I'm unworthy, then the court accepts him immediately. He's not a Jew yet, he's a candidate. But there's not a long negotiation. His motives seem above reproach. So if he says, I know what I'm getting into, I know why I'm doing this, and I'm not worthy of being a Jew, he's accepted as a candidate. All right. If you could scroll down, please. So then the rabbis there inform him of some, literally a better translation might be a few, of the lenient commandments and some of the stringent commandments. All right. They don't say what those are. There are no examples given. And they inform him of the sin of neglecting of the mitzvah to allow the poor to take gleanings from the field, things that are left behind from harvesting, forgotten sheaves of grain, and produce in the corner of one field, and the poor man tithes. These are all things that are given to the poor, that are charity laws from the Torah. Things that are left for the poor, and also every 2 years in a 7-year cycle, you have to give a tithe, a tenth of, not exactly a tenth, but close to a tenth of your income to the poor. What are they talking about here? It seems like they're saying, this is on the basis of another passage in the Talmud, that they might be saying, don't join Judaism because you think you're eligible to collect these benefits from these charity laws. You're not going to be eligible unless you're really poor. So it's not so much they're concerned about whether they know whether they have to give or not. It seems like they want to make sure they're not joining for ulterior motives to make money from being a Jew. Then they inform him of the experience. I'm sorry. Then they inform him of the punishment for transgressing, for violating the mitzvot. They say to him, be aware that before you came to the status and converted, had you eaten forbidden fat? Forbidden fat is fat that covers the vital organs. According to the law in the Torah, you're not allowed to eat those portions. You would be punished by karet, which literally means being cutting off. It's not clear exactly what it means. It might mean dying before your time. And had you profaned Shabbat, you would be punished by stoning. It was a capital offense. Right? If you're a Gentile, you can do those things. But now, if you have eaten forbidden fat, you're punished by karet. If you have profaned Shabbat, you're punished by stoning. Why these two mitzvot? Maybe because these are two of the hallmarks during this period of Jewish distinctiveness: the dietary laws and observing Shabbat. All right, let's go down a little more. And just as they inform him about the punishment for transgressing the mitzvot, so too they inform him about the reward granted for fulfilling them. They say to him, be aware that the world to come, meaning the next world, the afterlife, is made only for the righteous, and be aware that the Jewish people at the present time are unable to receive their full reward in this world, meaning don't expect a reward in this life. If you lead a good life and you're a good Jew, it'll come in the next world. And they are not able to receive either an abundance of good nor abundance of calamities, meaning your punishment also may not come in this world, but it'll come in the next. And they do not overwhelm him with threats, and they are not exacting about him with the detail of the mitzvot. Why? Because they don't want to discourage him. It's very simple what is required. What is the priority here? Observing the commandments. That's the priority they expect of him. In a minute, we'll talk about what's not expected here. Now, this is very different from what is expected today when we deal with converts, either Orthodox or conservative or Reform. There's a lengthy course that you have to go to. That's anywhere from 6 months to a year. And much more complicated than this. Their requirements were much simpler and much less demanding. If he accepts upon himself all of these, please scroll down. They circumcise him immediately, right? When he is healed from the circumcision, right? Because these are adults. It's a major thing. They immerse him immediately. He's goes to a mikvah, a body, a ritual bath. And then 2 scholars stand over him at the time of his immersion and inform him of some of the lenient mitzvot and some of the stringent mitzvot. Nowadays, it's not 2, but the Beit, the Jewish court, is 3. Once he has immersed and emerged, he is like a born Jew in every sense. He's a full-fledged Jew. All right. What I left out here is the rituals for a women. The women, there's obviously no circumcision. They have the same questions that are asked of them. Their immersion in the mikveh has to be witnessed by 2 women. Rabbis stand outside for reasons of modesty. And then a convert is a full-fledged Jew. Nowadays, what happens if a man is already circumcised? There is something called hatafat dam brit. Now, obviously, you can't circumcise somebody twice. You take a ritual pinprick of blood out of the male organ. It's like a symbolic circumcision. So let's move the screen away for a minute. So we'll come back to this text. We're not done with it. So what's missing here from what they ask of the convert? What's missing?
They don't ask about committing to believing in certain things.
Absolutely correct. There's nothing about God, right? There is nothing about you have to give up idolatry, you have to believe in God, in one God, nothing. Now, why is that? I'm not sure. Maybe it was taken for granted that they assumed if somebody was coming to convert, that they were abandoning their pagan beliefs and believed in one God. I don't know, but it's clearly missing. Later on in the Middle Ages, in the great Jewish philosopher, in his law code, Maimonides, called the Mishnah Torah, when he codifies the laws of conversion, he adds the following, that we tell the person not just about the mitzvot, but the principles of faith, the unity and uniqueness of God, and the prohibition against idolatry. And this, he says, you have to go on at length, but about the mitzvot, he echoes the language of the Talmud that you only have to talk about some of the commandments. So Maimonides in the Middle Ages adds what's missing here. Again, I don't know why it's not here. Maybe it's taken for granted that if the person is coming to convert to Judaism, it's because it's assumed that they believe in God. Right? Nowadays, at least in the conservative ceremony, that is assumed, but it's also made clear that you can't believe, for example, in Jesus anymore and convert to Judaism if a person comes from a Christian background. We're going to do, all right, any questions?
I have maybe one thought. I don't remember who said this, but I remember the sentence that it was in the context that we are just discussing. So this practical aspect versus the aspect of belief, and these words were something like this: that observing Shabbat did much more for preserving Jewish identity in the diaspora than any theological debate or anything related to beliefs. So maybe there is also something very strong in Judaism related to the custom and to the practice, right?
Yeah, Judaism's a very behavioristic religion. Mm-hmm. You know, I teach one course a year. This might show you the difference between America and Poland. I teach one class a year in a Catholic seminary. I teach future priests about Judaism, Jewish theology, basically. And one of the things, and they're wonderful students. I mean, you know, it's a pleasure having them because they're older and more mature than my undergraduate students that I teach in college. And one of the things that confounds them is how in Judaism, there's so many arguments about things. The Talmud is basically a book of arguments. And how even on certain basic beliefs, there are debates in Judaism. Because the Catholic Church is so hierarchical and is not a debating society like Judaism is. It's very alien to them. So anyways, I mentioned that just as an aside. So yeah, Judaism is a very behavioristic religion, but Maimonides, he's a theologian, so he wants to emphasize theology. More so, it would seem, than the rabbis. What was we'll get back to the text. The part that we have to deal with is the commentary in the text in the Gemara. But what was the purpose of this? Plain and simple, it was to regulate conversion, to have rules for how you do it, to have proper procedures. Conversion was going on, but there were no rules. So whenever this happened, sometime in the 2nd century, excuse me, they established rules. So what was involved? Acceptance of Torah and mitzvot, circumcision for men, immersion in a mikveh, which is a kind of purification and is done to establish a new status, and some kind of public ceremony. The rituals have to be performed correctly. So that's all contained here. Let's go. Can we go back to the text, please? All right. So a little further down. Okay. The master said, perfect. Okay. So this is now the Talmud commenting on this long section on the rituals for conversion. With regard to a potential convert who comes to the court in order to convert, the judge of the court, this is all repetition of what was said above, so I'm reading it fast. What did you see that motivated you to come to convert? And they inform him of some of the lenient and some of the stringent mitzvot. All right, here comes the commentary. What is the reason to say this to him? It is so, if he's going to withdraw from the conversion process, let him withdraw already at this stage, meaning at the beginning, before he's accepted as a candidate, let him know that he has to observe the commandments. And if he doesn't want to, then he can withdraw. And now comes a statement we're going to see in a few minutes, has a lot of commentary as to what it means. Rabbi Helbo said, converts are as harmful to the Jewish people as a scab, which I don't think this original passage is meant as a compliment, but we'll see. There are different interpretations of it. And the convert, it really should be the stranger, shall join himself with them, and they shall cleave to the house of Jacob. What he's doing here is making a pun. The Hebrew word for scab is sapacha, and the Hebrew word for cleave, which is really not related, is nisbechu. So perhaps you can hear the sound similarity, sapacha and nisbechu. So converts are like a scab. Okay, let's go down. Thank you. Then they inform him of the sin of neglecting the mitzvah, etc. I'm going to skip a few sentences. And they do not overwhelm him with threats, and they are not exacting with him about the details of the mitzvot. Rabbi Alan Iser said, what is the verse from which this ruling is derived? As it is written, and when she saw that she was steadfastly minded to go with her, she left off speaking with her. This is from the book of Ruth. Remember, I said that Ruth for the rabbis was the ideal convert. So this is from the conversation between Naomi and Ruth. And when Naomi says she's not going to, she can't dissuade Ruth from not coming with her, she lets her go. Same thing with a convert. You shouldn't push them away too much. Right? You shouldn't push away converts. All right? Please scroll down some more. The Breita continues, if he accepts upon himself all these ramifications, they circumcise him immediately. The Gemara asks, what is the reason to act immediately? We don't delay the performance of a mitzvah. All right? It's a mitzvah to convert somebody. It's a mitzvah, if they're becoming Jewish, to circumcise them. So we want to do it as soon as possible. All right. Now, before we go to questions, I want to look at this phrase and some of the comments on it, that converts are as harmful to the Jewish people as a scab, which I think on the surface seems to be a negative statement. And in the sources in the Talmud, most of the statements about conversions and converts are positive, but there's some negative ones. And through the ages, the comments on converts from Jewish sources are mixed, both positive and negative. These comments are from a medieval commentary on the Torah called Tosafot, written in the 12th, 13th century. And in these comments, you can see the mixture of attitudes. So here first are comments from our passage in the Talmud. You've got 4 different explanations. Because converts are not expert in the commandments and Jews learn from them. What they learn bad habits from them. Why? Because all of Israel are responsible for another. So that's a burden on the Jews, the native-born Jews, to make sure converts do things the right way. 3, in my opinion, is kind of, I would call it racist in modern terminology, because converts mix together in marriage with people born Jewish, and the Shekhinah, the divine presence, dwells only among families with pure descent, who are purely Jewish, not mixed converts and Jews. So this is a very tribal statement. 4, because Israel was greatly warned with respect to the oppression of converts, and it's impossible to be sufficiently careful in this. In the Bible, there are many admonitions for the Jews to be careful, to take care of. The Hebrew word is gerim. In the Bible, it means strangers, non-citizens of Israel, to treat them kindly and not to exploit them. The rabbis took that term ger, which means stranger, non-citizen, and turned its meaning into convert. So ger in rabbinic Hebrew means a convert, not a stranger, but a convert. And the plural is gerim, and the verb is giur, to convert somebody. So in the Talmud, there's an explicit statement that you can't oppress a convert. What does that mean? The Talmud says you're not allowed to say to a convert, ha, you used to be an idol worshiper, or, you used to eat forbidden foods. You're not allowed to say things like that. All right, another set of explanations elsewhere in the Talmud from the same commentary. Why? Because this is similar to one of the statements we had above. Because, okay, I'm sorry, scroll down. Thank you. Because they're not expert in the commandments and they bring trouble. So they're going to do the wrong things. They're going to treat Jews bad examples. Number 2 is really interesting. It sees exile as something positive, the Jews being dispersed to the 4 corners of the world, as something positive. Why were the Jews dispersed? In the Bible and in much of rabbinic literature is seen as a punishment for the failures of the Jews to live up to the covenant with God. But in this statement, it's seen as something positive, because if the Jews are dispersed all over the world, they can attract people and convert them to Judaism. Number 3 comes from a convert. Rabbi Abraham the convert offers this interpretation because converts are expert in the mitzvot and more punctilious, more observant, reminding God by comparison of Israel's sins, meaning they're going to make native-born Jews look bad because they're better Jews. It's just the opposite of number 1. So here you see a real mixture of attitudes, right? If you could remove the text, please. Thank you. So I want to go back for a minute to the ceremony and rituals of conversion. It seems to me, and this is not an original idea, that the conversion ceremony is in a way based on the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, right? The giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai was accompanied by making sure everybody was circumcised. The Israelites in the book of Exodus are told they must purify themselves, meaning immerse themselves in water, and they have to offer sacrifices. In the time the temple stood, according to the rabbis, conversion was accompanied by sacrifice. So the model, in a way, is the giving of the Torah Mount Sinai. Just like the Jewish people as a whole were converted at Mount Sinai in a kind of mass conversion, so too are individual converts converted. It's another moment of being at Mount Sinai for the individual convert to Judaism. All right, questions or comments? No? So this takes us just through the Middle Ages. And in modern times, it gets very complicated because of who is willing to recognize whose conversions. When Judaism splits into the different denominations, Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform, it becomes very complicated in Israel. And then a question of, are you allowed to convert people who are converting for the sake of marriage and not for reasons of faith? Right? So that's next week when we move into the modern period. All right,
Thank you.
bye-bye. Everybody stay
Bye.
well.